Have you ever heard someone call your name in a voice you'd recognize anywhere, only to find no one there? My name is Rachel Torres. I'm a park ranger with the British Columbia Park Service. For the past 6 years, I've been stationed at Birch-wood Provincial Park in the central interior region, about 200 kilometers north of Prince George. My job is straightforward: monitor the trails, maintain the facilities, assist visitors, respond to emergencies. Standard park rangers work in a location that sees maybe 3,000 visitors a year. Most people come for the fishing, hiking, the quiet. They don't know about the old settlement, about what we found there 15 years ago, about why certain areas of the park are permanently closed. If you stay until the end, I'll tell you about the protocols. Not the ones in the ranger handbook. The other ones. The ones that get passed down from ranger to ranger in handwritten notes and quiet conversations. Protocols about sounds you might hear in the forest. About voices that aren't what they seem. About why we never go looking for someone who calls from the restricted zone. Because at Birch-wood Park, there are rules that have nothing to do with wildlife management or visitor safety. Rules that exist because previous rangers learned what happens when you trust a familiar voice calling from the wrong place. I grew up in Kamloops. My father was a conservation officer. My mother taught environmental science at Thompson Rivers University. I spent my childhood in the backcountry, learning to track animals, understanding forest ecology, respecting the wilderness. After high school, I got my diploma in renewable resources and worked seasonal positions across BC, Revelstoke, Wells Gray, the Caribou. Each posting taught me something different about park management, but after 4 years of moving every season, I wanted stability, a permanent position, place I could really know. BC Parks offered me Birchwood in 2018, year-round posting, good benefits, solo ranger station with backup 20 minutes away. The park covered 14,000 hectares of mixed forest and wetland. Not huge, not famous, just a quiet northern park with decent fishing and a handful of established trails. The job posting mentioned it was a sensitive cultural area, with historical significance requiring special management protocols. I figured that meant indigenous heritage sites, archaeological features, standard cultural resource management. I was only partially right. The park has a history. In the 1890s, a small settlement existed on what's now the restricted eastern section. Maybe 40 people, homesteaders, trappers. A few families are trying to establish farms in the bush. The settlement lasted about 8 years. Then in 1901, everyone left. Suddenly, completely. They abandoned their cabins, left belongings behind. I walked out and never came back. There are records of them arriving in Prince George, requesting relocation assistance, refusing to say why they'd left. The provincial government sent investigators, found the cabins intact. No signs of violence, no indication of what had driven an entire settlement away. The area was logged in the 1920s, became Crown land, eventually incorporated into the provincial park system in 1973. But certain sections were marked as restricted from the beginning. No trails, no development, no public access. The official reason is unstable terrain and cultural sensitivity. The real reason is more complicated. My station is a small building at the park entrance. Office, radio room, living quarters, solar panels, everything I need to manage the park and live on site. When I arrived, the outgoing ranger met me for the handover. His name was Marcus Webb. He'd worked at Birchwood for 11 years. He looked tired, older than his 43 years. We spent 3 days going over procedures, trail maintenance schedules, visitor management, emergency response protocols, standard ranger work. On my last day of orientation, Marcus pulled out a separate binder. Unlabeled. "This isn't official," he said. "It's not part of the park management plan. But every ranger who's worked here has added to it. Read it. Follow it. Don't ignore it because it seems strange." He opened the binder. Inside were handwritten notes, dated entries, observations from rangers going back to 1973. The first entry was titled, "Sound Protocol Restricted Zone." It described voices heard near the old settlement site. Voices that sounded like family members, friends, co-workers. Voices calling for help, calling names, leading people deeper into the restricted area. The entry warned, "Do not respond to voices from the restricted zone. Do not investigate. Do not assume the voice is who it sounds like. Return to the station and document what you heard." I looked at Marcus. "Is this serious?" "Yes. Every ranger who's worked here has heard them. Some rangers have documented dozens of incidents. Others are just a few. But everyone hears them eventually. And the rangers who didn't follow the protocol? 2 requested immediate transfer. 1 disappeared for 16 hours before we found her 3 kilometers into the restricted zone. She couldn't remember how she got there. Couldn't explain why she'd left the trail. She resigned a week later." He flipped through more pages. Other entries. Other protocols. Rules about sounds that aren't voices. Rules about lights seen at night in the restricted area. Rules about what to do if you find objects that don't belong. "The Park Service knows about this," Marcus said. "They've known since the 70s. They've investigated, brought in researchers." I tried to explain it, but nobody has a good explanation. So they settled on management, protocols, ways to work here safely without understanding what's happening. What is happening? Marcus closed the binder. Nobody knows. The settlement left in 1901 for a reason they wouldn't talk about. Whatever that reason was, it's still here. The voices are part of it. But there are other things too. Patterns. Phenomena. Things that don't fit any natural explanation. Your job isn't to understand it. Your job is to manage the park safely. That means following the protocols, even when they don't make sense. Especially then. He left that afternoon. The Park Service truck drove away. And I was alone. Alone with a park I didn't fully understand. With protocols that sounded like paranoid fiction. With a binder full of warnings about voices that mimic people you know. I wanted to dismiss it. Wanted to think Marcus was exaggerating. That previous rangers had let isolation get to them. That there was a rational explanation for whatever they'd experienced. But I'd seen Marcus's face when he talked about the ranger who disappeared for 16 hours. I heard the tension in his voice. He wasn't exaggerating. He wasn't isolated for too long. He was giving me the information I needed to stay safe. And that was more frightening than any ghost story. That night I read the entire binder. Every entry. Every protocol. Every observation from rangers spanning 5 decades. The patterns were consistent. Voices that mimic people you know. Always from the restricted zone or the trails that border it. Always calling your name. Always sounding urgent. Distressed. Asking for help. And rangers who responded, who went to investigate, always reported the same thing. They'd follow the voice. Walk deeper into the forest. Then suddenly realize they'd gone much farther than they intended. Lost time. Lost track of their location. Found themselves in areas they'd never consciously decided to walk to. The protocols were clear. If you hear a voice calling from the restricted zone, acknowledge it in your log but do not respond. Do not investigate. Return to the station if possible. If you're with visitors, guide them away from the area immediately. Do not tell them what you heard. Do not alarm them. Just move them to a different location. And most importantly, never trust a familiar voice in the forest. Never assume it's who it sounds like, because according to 50 years of documentation, it never is. I spent my first week settling in, learning the trail system, meeting the few regular visitors, maintaining facilities, normal ranger work. The park was beautiful. Dense mixed forest, clear streams, good wildlife habitat. During the day it felt peaceful, safe. But at night, knowing what the binder said, knowing what previous rangers had experienced, I found myself listening more carefully, paying attention to sounds that might be more than wind or animals, wondering when I'd hear it. The voice, the thing that had driven away a settlement and troubled rangers for half a century. I didn't have to wait long. On day 9, while checking the Northern Trail system, I heard my sister's voice. Clear, distinct, coming from the forest to my east, from the direction of the restricted zone. "Rachel," she called. "Rachel, can you help me? I'm lost." The voice was perfect. Same tone, same inflection, exactly how my sister sounds when she's worried. But my sister was in Kamloops, 400 kilometers away. I talked to her that morning on the phone. She wasn't here. She couldn't be here. I remembered the protocol. Do not respond. Do not investigate. Document and return to station. I turned around, walked back the way I'd come. The voice called again. "Rachel, please. I can't find the trail." Closer now, definitely from the restricted area. My heart was pounding. Every instinct told me to go help, to find whoever was calling, because it sounded exactly like my sister, exactly like someone I loved who needed help. But I kept walking, back to the station, back to safety, and I documented what I heard. Time, location, description of the voice. Just like the protocol said, just like 50 years of rangers before me had done, because I was starting to understand. The warnings weren't paranoid. The protocols weren't superstition. They were surviving. And whatever existed in that restricted zone, whatever had driven away the settlement and troubled this park for over a century, it knew how to sound like the people we love. It knew exactly how to make us want to help. And that was the most terrifying thing I'd learned since arriving at Birch-wood Park. Tomorrow I'll continue my work. Check trails, maintain facilities, assist visitors. But I do it knowing that the forest might call my name, that I might hear voices I recognize, and that the most important part of my job wasn't in the ranger handbook. It was in that unlabeled binder, in those handwritten warnings, in the knowledge that some places in the wilderness operate by rules we don't understand. And the only way to work safely in those places is to follow the protocols, even when every part of you wants to help the familiar voice calling from the trees. Especially then. The first week after hearing my sister's voice, I threw myself into routine work, trail maintenance, facility checks, visitor assistance, anything to stay busy. Do not think about what I've heard. But it stayed with me. The perfect mimicry. The tone of worry in a voice that couldn't possibly belong to my sister. I called her that evening, just to confirm she was home. Safe. She was fine. Hadn't left Kamloops. I had no idea why I was checking on her. I documented the incident in the binder as protocol required. Added my entry to decades of similar reports. Day 9 to 1437, Northern Trail Junction near restricted boundary. Female voice. Identified as sister, verified not present. Called name twice, claimed to be lost. Did not respond. I returned to the station. Duration of call approximately 45 seconds. professional, detached. But my hand shook slightly as I wrote. The park stayed quiet for another week. Normal operations. A few day hikers. Some fishermen at the lake. Nobody reported anything unusual. I started to relax. I started to think maybe it was a one-time occurrence. Something I could file away and forget about. But on day 17, while doing an evening patrol of the campground, I heard it again. Different this time. My father's voice. Coming from the trail that led toward the restricted zone. "Rachel, is that you?" Clear. Concerned. Exactly how he sounded when checking if I was safe. "I saw your truck. Are you out here?" I froze. My father was in Kamloops. Retired. He didn't hike anymore. His knees couldn't handle it. And he definitely wasn't in Birch-wood Park at 7 p.m. on a Tuesday. But the voice was perfect. The cadence. The slight roughness from years of smoking he'd quit a decade ago. Every detail is correct. I followed the protocol. Didn't respond. Turned around. I walked back to the station. The voice called twice more. Getting more insistent. "Rachel? Rachel, answer me if you can hear me." I forced myself to keep walking. Do not turn around. To not investigate. By the time I reached the station, my heart was racing. Not from exertion. From fighting the overwhelming instinct to respond to my father's voice calling my name. I documented it. Called my dad. He was home watching television. I hadn't been hiking in 3 years. I didn't tell him what happened. I didn't want to worry him. I just said I wanted to hear his voice. He thought I was lonely out here. Maybe I was. But that wasn't why I'd called. That night I read through the binder again. Looking for patterns. Looking for explanations. One entry from 1987 caught my attention. A ranger named Patricia Coleman had documented 23 separate voice incidents over 2 years. She kept detailed records. The voices came more frequently in spring and fall. They always occurred within 500 meters of the restricted zone boundary. They always called names. Always sounded urgent or distressed. And they always mimicked someone the ranger knew personally. Family members. Friends. Former co-workers. People whose voices would be recognized immediately. Patricia had written a note at the end of her documentation. The intelligence behind this is clear. It knows who we care about. It knows exactly which voices will make us respond. This isn't random. It's targeted, purposeful. And that's why the protocol matters. Because whatever this is, it's trying to draw us in. And he's very, very good at it. I closed the binder. Sat in the dark station thinking about what I'd read. Patricia was right. This wasn't random. Both voices I'd heard were family members. People I'd instinctively help. People whose distress would override my caution. Something in that restricted zone knew that. Knew exactly how to sound like them. And was using that knowledge to call me closer. The question was why? What happened if someone responded? If they followed the voice into the restricted area? I'd read about rangers who had. Most were found within hours. Disoriented. Unable to explain why they'd left the trail. One ranger in 1994 had been found sitting at the edge of the old settlement site. She couldn't remember the previous 6 hours. Couldn't say how she'd gotten there. She'd transferred to a different park a month later and never spoke about the incident again. But one ranger had never been found. David Chen, 2003. He'd reported hearing voices multiple times. Had followed protocol for 3 months. Then one day he didn't return from a routine patrol. Search and rescue found his ranger truck at a trailhead. His radio. His pack. But no David. They searched for 2 weeks. Brought in dogs. Helicopters. Ground teams. Nothing. He'd vanished into the forest. The official report listed him as lost in the wilderness, presumed dead, but the unofficial notes in the binder told a different story. His last radio check-in had mentioned hearing his daughter's voice, saying she was hurt. I needed help. The transmission cut off mid-sentence, and he was never seen again. I didn't sleep well that night. Kept thinking about David Chun, about how strong the urge must have been to help when he heard his daughter calling, how impossible it would be to ignore. And I wondered if I'd be able to follow the protocol if I heard that kind of urgency. If the voice claimed someone I loved was injured, in danger, would I be strong enough to walk away? Over the next month, I heard voices 7 more times. My mother, my best friend from university, my former supervisor, my childhood neighbor, even my ex-boyfriend from 5 years ago, each time perfectly mimicked, each time calling my name, claiming to be lost or hurt or needing help. And each time I followed the protocol, didn't respond, documented the incident. I returned to the station, but it was getting harder. The instinct to help was powerful, primal. Every time I heard a familiar voice calling for help, every part of me wanted to investigate, to make sure they were okay. Fighting that instinct was exhausting. On day 47, I got back up. Another ranger transferred in to help with the summer season. His name was James Murdoch, mid-30s, 7 years with BC Parks. He'd worked mostly in the southern interior. This was his first posting in the north. I was supposed to orient him, teach him the park, show him the protocols. We spent his first week covering the basics: trail system, facilities, emergency procedures, standard ranger work. He was competent, professional, easy to work with, but I hadn't told him about the voices yet, hadn't shown him the binder. I was waiting for the right time, waiting to see if he'd hear them himself before I explained. The right time came on his 8th day. We were checking the Western Trail system, staying well away from the restricted zone. James was ahead of me on the trail when he suddenly stopped, turned. Did you hear that? Hear what? Someone calling. A woman's voice. Sounded like my mom. He looked toward the forest, toward the east, toward the restricted area. She said my name. Sounded worried. I've been waiting for this. Don't respond. Don't investigate. We need to head back to the station. James looked at me confused. But if someone's out there, they're not. Trust me. We need to go. Now. The voice called again. I couldn't hear it, but I could see James's reaction, the way his face changed, the way he started to move toward the sound. I grabbed his arm. James, look at me. That's not your mother. That's not a person. Follow me back to the station and I'll explain everything. He resisted for a moment. The pull was strong. I could see it in his eyes. But ranger training kicked in. When a senior ranger gives a direct order, you follow it. He turned away from the voice. Walk with me back to the station. I could hear him breathing hard, fighting the same instinct I'd fought 9 times already. Back at the station, I showed him the binder. Let him read the entries. Explained the protocols. His face went through several expressions. Disbelief. Confusion, then finally understanding as he read incident after incident describing exactly what he just experienced. How is this possible? He asked. Nobody knows. The Park Service has investigated multiple times. They've brought in researchers, audio specialists, psychologists. Nobody can explain it, but the pattern is consistent. It's been happening since at least the 70s, probably longer. The settlement that abandoned this area in 1901? We think this is why they left. James read more entries. Stopped at David Chen's final report. He disappeared? 15 years ago. Followed a voice. Never came back. They searched for weeks. Found nothing. I paused. That's why the protocols matter. This isn't paranoia. It's not isolation making people hear things. Something in that restricted zone mimics voices. Specifically the voices of people we know. People we'd help. And if you follow those voices, you don't come back the same. If you come back at all. James was quiet for a long time. Finally he said, "My mom died 3 years ago. Cancer." That voice sounded exactly like her. From before she got sick. When she was healthy. His hands were shaking. "If you hadn't stopped me, I would have followed it. I would have run toward it." I know. That's what it does. That's why we follow the protocols. Even when every instinct tells us to help. I showed him the documentation procedure. How to log incidents. What details to record. You'll hear it again. Maybe not your mom specifically, but other voices. Other people you know. Each time you hear it, you document it. And you don't respond. Ever. No matter how urgent it sounds. Over the next few weeks, James and I settled into a routine. We worked in pairs when possible. Checked trails together. Maintained facilities together. And when one of us heard a voice, the other would be there to enforce the protocol. To pull them back. To remind them it wasn't real. I heard my sister twice more. My father once. James heard his mom 3 more times. His brother. His best friend from high school. Each time we documented it. Each time we resisted the pull to investigate. But the voices were changing. Getting more sophisticated. More urgent. I first noticed it on day 63. I was alone, checking the northern boundary trail. I heard my sister again. But this time she wasn't just lost. "Rachel. Oh God, Rachel, please. I fell. I think my leg is broken. Please, you have to help me." The pain in her voice was real. Convincing. Exactly how she'd sound if she was actually injured. I stopped walking. My hand went to my radio. Every instinct screamed to call for backup. To coordinate a rescue. To help my sister who was hurt and scared and calling my name. But she wasn't here. She was in Kamloops. Safe. This was the thing. The mimic. And it was getting better at knowing exactly what would make me break protocol. I forced myself to turn around. To walk away. But it followed. The voice moved through the forest parallel to the trail. Staying just out of sight. "Rachel, please. It hurts so much. I can't walk. Don't leave me." Crying now. Sobbing. The sound of someone in genuine pain and fear. I started walking faster. Almost running. The voice kept pace. Keep calling. Kept sounding more desperate. I made it back to the station. Locked the door. Sat shaking for 20 minutes before I could write the report. James found me like that when he returned from his patrol. "It's getting worse," I told him. "It's not just calling names anymore. It's creating scenarios. Making it sound like an emergency. Real injuries. Real fear." James checked my documentation. This matches what Patricia Coleman wrote in 1988. She said the voices escalated. Start simple. Then get more elaborate. More convincing. Like it's learning what doesn't work and trying new approaches. He looked at me. "We might need to request additional support. If this is escalating, if it's happening to both of us, we might need more rangers here. People who understand the protocols." I called the district supervisor. Explained the situation. She listened. Sighed. "This happens every few years. The voices go through active periods. Usually lasts 2 to 3 months. Then they quiet down again. We can send someone if you need backup, but honestly, you're doing everything right. Following the protocols. Documenting the incidents. That's all you can do. What if someone breaks protocol? What if a visitor hears it? That's why we limit access. Why certain areas are restricted. Why don't we advertise this park heavily? We keep visitor numbers low. Keep people away from the boundary area. In 40 years, we've only had 3 visitors report hearing unusual sounds. We told them it was likely coyotes or ravens. They accepted that, finished their visits and left. As long as you two follow the protocols and keep visitors away from the restricted zone, you'll be fine. She was right. We were doing everything right. But it didn't make it easier. Didn't make the voices less convincing. Didn't stop the psychological toll of hearing people you love calling for help and having to walk away. By day 90, the voices were constant. Multiple times per day. Always near the restricted boundary. Always mimicking someone we knew. James heard his deceased mother so often he stopped reacting visibly. Just documented it and moved on. I heard my entire family, friends, even people I barely remembered from years ago. The thing was going deep into our memories. Finding voices we'd respond to. We stopped sleeping well. The psychological weight was crushing. Hearing your loved ones in distress. Knowing it's not real but having every instinct scream at you to help anyway. James started having nightmares. I'd hear him through the walls of the station, calling out, arguing with voices that weren't there. During the day he was fine, professional, followed every protocol. But at night the voices haunted him. I wasn't doing much better. Started seeing things at the edge of my vision. Movement in the forest. Shapes that weren't there when I looked directly. The isolation was getting to both of us. We were alone in this park with something that knew exactly how to hurt us. How to exploit our desire to help the people we loved. And we couldn't even explain it to anyone outside because it sounded insane. On day 98, James made a mistake. We were checking separate trails. Standard procedure. Maintaining radio contact. Around 2 p.m., his radio cut out mid-transmission. I tried to raise him. No response. I gave him 30 minutes. Still nothing. Protocol said to wait at the station. Let him return on his own. Don't go searching. But 30 minutes became an hour. An hour became 2. And I knew something was wrong. I called the district supervisor. Explained the situation. She authorized a search but said to wait for backup. They'd send another ranger. Should arrive in 3 hours. But I couldn't wait 3 hours. James could be hurt. Actually hurt, not voice mimic hurt. I made a decision I knew violated protocol. I went looking for him. I followed his planned route. Called his name on the radio every few minutes. No response. Found his truck at the western trailhead. Radio inside. Pack inside. But no James. I followed the trail. It led toward the restricted boundary, and I found footprints. Boot prints. James's size. Leading off the trail. Into the restricted area. Heading east toward the old settlement site. I should have turned back. Should have waited for backup. Should have followed the protocol that said never enter the restricted zone. But James was my partner. My responsibility. And those were his footprints. Fresh. Made within the last hour. He was in there somewhere. I had to find him. I marked my position on the GPS, made sure my radio was on. And I followed the tracks into the restricted area. The forest was dense. Old growth cedar and spruce. Very little undergrowth. The footprints were clear. James had been moving fast. Almost running. The tracks led deeper. Away from any maintained trail. Into territory I'd never mapped. Territory that had been off limits for 100 years. After 20 minutes I found him. Sitting on the ground at the edge of a clearing. The old settlement site. I could see the remains of the foundations. rotted cabin logs, overgrown paths. James was just sitting there, staring at nothing. I approached carefully. "James, can you hear me?" He didn't respond, didn't acknowledge me. I got closer, touched his shoulder. He flinched, looked at me like he didn't recognize me. "Rachel?" "Yeah, it's me. What happened? Why did you leave the trail?" I heard her. "My mom. She said she was here. Said she needed to tell me something important. Something she couldn't tell me before she died." His voice was flat, distant. I followed her voice. She kept saying just a little further, just a little more. And then he looked around. "I don't know. I don't remember walking here. I just remember following her voice, and then suddenly I was sitting here." "How long has it been?" I checked my watch. "About 2.5 hours since your radio cut out." 2.5 hours. He stood up, unsteady. "I don't remember any of it. Just her voice. And then waking up here." He looked at the old settlement remains. "This is it, isn't it? The place they all left. The place we're not supposed to come to." "Yes. And we need to leave. Now, can you walk?" James nodded. We started back. I used my GPS to navigate. The whole time I kept expecting to hear voices, to be drawn deeper. But the forest was silent. Too silent. No birds. No wind. Just our footsteps and breathing. It took 40 minutes to reach the trail. Another 20 to get back to the station. Backup arrived 10 minutes after we did. The district supervisor was not happy. "You both violated protocol. Major protocol." James entered the restricted zone. "Rachel, you went in after him without backup. Do you understand how close you came to becoming statistics? To become another disappearance we couldn't explain?" She was right. We'd both screwed up. James by following the voice. Me by going after him without waiting. But I'd brought him back. He was safe. Disoriented but safe. That had to count for something. The supervisor made us both submit detailed reports. Then she made a decision. "James, you're being transferred. Effective immediately. You've been compromised. The voices got to you once. They'll try again. And next time, Rachel might not be able to pull you back." She looked at me. "Rachel, you're being reassigned to the visitor center. No more trail patrols. No more work near the restricted boundary. You'll handle administration, visitor services. Let other rangers handle the field work." That was 8 months ago. James transferred to a park near Victoria. He emails occasionally. Says he's doing better. I still have nightmares, but they're fading. He doesn't hear his mother's voice anymore. The distance helped. Getting away from Birchwood helped. I'm still here. But I'm stuck at the visitor center now. Answering phones. Processing permits. Giving safety talks to the few visitors we get. Other rangers handle the patrols. Handle the trail checks. They're veterans. People who've worked here before. Who knows the protocols. Who can handle the voices. But I still hear them. Sometimes late at night. When I'm alone at the station. My sister called. My father. My mother. Always from the direction of the restricted zone. Always urgent. Always convincing. But I don't respond. I document them. Add entries to the binder that now has my handwriting filling several pages. And I follow the protocols. The Park Service never figured out what causes the voices. Multiple investigations over 50 years. Nothing conclusive. Some researchers think it's infrasound. Low-frequency sounds that can cause hallucinations. Others think it's psychological. Isolation and expectation creating shared delusions. But none of those explanations account for the specificity. For how the voices know exactly who we know. exactly how those people sound, exactly what will make us respond. I've read every historical document about the settlement, looking for clues. The 1901 departure was organized but rushed. People left in groups over a 3-day period, walked to Prince George, requested relocation assistance but wouldn't explain why they'd left. Provincial records show multiple interviews with former residents. All refused to discuss what happened. One interview transcript from 1903 has a single revealing line. An elderly woman who'd lived there said, "The forest learned our names, learned our dead, learned how to call us home. We couldn't stay once it learned. The forest learned our names." That's exactly what it feels like. Like something in that restricted zone is studying us, learning who we are, who we love, who we've lost, and using that information to draw us closer. For what purpose, I don't know. David Chen never came back to tell us. The rangers who were found disoriented couldn't remember what happened to them. The settlement residents refused to speak about it. But I know the voices are real. I know they're targeted. I know they're dangerous. And I know the protocols work. Follow them and you stay safe. Break them and you become another mystery. Another disappearance. Another entry in the binder warning future rangers about what lives in the restricted zone. I'll finish my posting here next year. After that, I'm transferring. Maybe somewhere coastal. Maybe somewhere without old settlements and restricted zones. Somewhere I can do normal ranger work without hearing my family calling from the forest. But part of me knows I'll never really leave. The voices will follow. In my memory. In my dreams. In the moments late at night when I hear something that sounds almost like my name. Because that's what I learned at Birch-wood Park. That's what 6 years taught me. That there are places in the wilderness where something exists that we don't understand. Something old. Something intelligent. Something that knows how to sound like the people we love. And the only defense we have is to not listen. To not respond. To not trust familiar voices calling from the wrong places. The protocols work. They've worked for 50 years. They'll keep working. As long as rangers follow them. As long as we remember that not every voice is what it seems. That sometimes the people we love most are the ones we can't go to help. Because in places like Birch-wood Park, love is a weapon. Familiarity is bait. And the forest has learned exactly how to use both against us. I still add to the binder. Still document every voice I hear. Still follow every protocol. Because the next ranger needs to know. I need to understand that this is real. That the warnings aren't paranoia. That the voices will sound exactly like people you know. And when you hear them, when every instinct tells you to help, you have to walk away. You have to resist. You have to follow the protocols. Because the alternative is sitting at the edge of an abandoned settlement with no memory of how you got there. Or disappearing completely like David Chen. Or leaving like the original settlers did. Driven away by something they couldn't explain but knew was dangerous. The forest learned our names. And it's still calling them. Still waiting. Still testing who will respond. Who will break protocol? Who will trust a familiar voice in the wrong place? I won't be one of them. I've heard my sister calling too many times. Heard my father. Heard my mother. And every time I've walked away. Documented it. Follow the protocols. Because I know they're not real. I know my family is safe in Kamloops. I know the voices are mimics. Copies. Lures designed to draw me into the restricted zone. But knowing doesn't make it easier. Doesn't stop the instinct to help. Doesn't stop the guilt of walking away from a voice that sounds like someone you love asking for help. That's the real horror of Birch-wood Park. Not that the voices exist. But they know exactly how to make you want to respond. How to exploit your love. Your loyalty. Your basic human decency. And you have to fight all of that. Have to become someone who can hear a family member crying and walk away. Because that's what survival requires in places where the forest learned our names. The protocols work. Remember that. If you ever work at a place like this, if you ever hear familiar voices calling from places they shouldn't be, remember. Don't respond, don't investigate, document and return to safety. The voices aren't what they seem. The people you love aren't lost in the forest. And whatever is calling you, whatever learned how to mimic those voices, it doesn't have good intentions. The forest learned our names. And it's still calling. But as long as we follow the protocols, as long as we remember that not every voice is real, we can work here. We can survive here. We can manage this beautiful, terrible place without becoming another mystery, another disappearance. Another story future rangers tell about what happens when you trust a familiar voice calling from the restricted zone. That's what I learned at Birch-wood Park. That's what I'm passing on to whoever comes after me. The voices are real. The danger is real. The protocols work. Follow them. Trust them. And never, ever respond to a familiar voice calling your name from the forest. Because in places like this, the people you love most are sometimes the ones you have to ignore. For your own survival. For theirs. For everyone who'll work here after you're gone. The forest learned our names. But we learned something too. We learned how to not answer. And that's the only thing keeping us safe.